Hi guys, welcome to your channel Digital Empaths, where we discuss on the different facets of the digital ecosystem, where we talk about some of the interesting industry trends. We invite some amazing guests in our episodes who are serial entrepreneurs, who are working professionals, who brings lots of depth and breadth in the digital ecosystem. Here at Digital Empaths, our mantra is to democratizing the insights and knowledge with empathy. We are your host, Sushant Ajmani.
And Sundar Balakrishnan.
And guys, we are really delighted to have a new guest in our episode today. His name is Anurag Kedia, who is a serial entrepreneur, have more than 15 years of experience in the beauty and wellness category. His most interesting stint was with Four Fountain Season Distress and Spa, where he spent over a decade there as a co-founder and CEO. And he recently started his new venture under the brand name Pilgrim, which is an exciting D2C personal care brand. So Anurag, we are really delighted to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you, Sushant. Thank you, Sundar. Very happy to be here and look forward to an exciting and interesting chat.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Anurag, I know you have spent more than 15 years in this particular category. And it's really interesting to me because someone like you who's come with an engineering background, did his engineering from IIT Bombay, did his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. How come it happened that you decided to enter in this category rather than following a usual engineering path?
So I think it is some amount of fate and an accident, I'll say. So actually, I had not even planned to be an entrepreneur when I was graduating from my MBA college. I took up a job with the Tata Group. Then later on, I moved to consulting with KPMG. And I was chatting with a friend of mine, a batchmate, in fact, a junior from IIT Bombay and batchmate from IIM Ahmedabad. And he said that, he wanted to start off something, and then we got chatting. And the one common thing we realized was that we both were excited about consumer brands. So we said, why not look at something in the consumer brand space? And the vertical was quite open, actually. This is around 2005-06, sometime in 2005-06. We said, let's do something in consumer brands and we'll figure out what to do. So we actually used to sit down and make a list of everything that could be sold in the market, whether product or service. And we had a laundry list of close to 150, ideas, all of them in the consumer domain, saying, what is it that we can sell? Then ideas, kept getting shot down. We kept researching. We had come very close to starting a grocery retail chain, this 15 years back in the rural parts of the country, because a lot of action was happening in retail in the urban India, but rural India was untouched largely. But then later we realized that it needed a lot more capital than what, two young entrepreneurs could afford to raise. And which is how then, after several rounds of shortlisting and, shooting down ideas, we came to the ideas of spas. And we said, this is an interesting category because it's very large in the West. It's very large in the East. So you go to, China, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, or you go to the West, whether it's Europe, US, very large categories, but very small in India. While traditionally and historically, if you see, massages have been a part of Indian culture. To that extent, massages were born in India. Swedish massage is a new phenomenon. What is called as Malish or Abhyangam, or the Ayurvedic massage has been around for thousands of years. So we thought, there was something interesting out there, and which is why we kind of decided to get into spas. And then one thing led to another, as they say, and we have stuck to the domain, and new ideas and concepts have come out of the same domain.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think it's really good to know. And I know you must be very excited to start a new venture recently under the brand name Pilgrim. And some of our listeners who don't know about it, so it's a very exciting D2C personal care brand where they're focusing on the skin. And I think some of the time that I, Anurag, have spent with some of the leading dermatologists in US, I remember when I was there, I got a chance to work with a couple of them. One was Dr. Pericon MD, and another was Dr. Murad, okay? Both have their own clinical skincare line. And while working with them, I learned very interesting thing that it's all about face, jawline, neckline, and hands, okay? And the two fundamental problems that are there in the skincare industry, one is your acne and blemishes, your pores, the oiling. A lot of women have the oily skin. So if I look at this particular category, and I know it's very competitive, the margins are very good, and a lot of CPG players are there in India, and a lot of other small and mid-sized players are also there. And you've launched your brand in this pandemic environment where the things are already very tough. The demand is not there. We are all going in the demand shock phase right now. So I want to understand that what was the idea behind that, and which segment you are going after, and what problem you're trying to solve.
So if you look at the market in India right now, Sushant, the personal care or hair and skincare market is very, very large. And there are a lot of documented numbers, but the numbers vary depending upon which research you're looking at. But it's in tens of billions of dollars. That is something which all the reports agree. Whether it is $10 billion or $20 billion is a matter of how you're slicing the market and which report you're picking up. The other interesting thing is that the market is also growing at a very fast pace. Because the per capita consumption of products in India is really low. If you look at a Southeast Asian market, like, obviously the most evolved market is Korea, the average number of products which a woman uses on a face on a daily basis is 12. So an average Korean woman would use 12 products of various kinds on her face on a daily basis.
Wow.
That number for Indian urban SEC AB women, in metros is less than 2. But this has changed, obviously, right? So if you go back 20-30 years, there was just one soap which was head to toe. There was no concept of a shampoo. The first hair product which I remember which came to India is Godrej Crowning Glory, and a very popular movie actress Dimple Kapadia used to be and as kids also we used to be fairly fascinated by her. So I managed to get some pocket money out and go and buy that bar of soap. That was the first hair product which came out. After several years, then we got introduced to a shampoo. After several years of that, we got introduced to a conditioner. Face wash is a very recent phenomenon. If you look at the Indian market in that sense, it's probably 10-15 years. So all of these products are very, very recent to India. But the aspiration, the exposure, and the intent and the capability to buy is there now. So the growth which we are seeing in a certain profile of customers is very high, and which is where I think the large part of the market is. The other opportunity is that the skincare, hair care market is right now dominated by large players. These players treat their brands as monologues. They want to speak, but they either don't have the capability or don't have the intent, or sometimes both, to be able to engage with the consumers in a dialogue. Today, consumers want to be talking to the brands one-on-one, asking very personal questions, getting to know the products better before they buy. We are a 1-month-old brand in that sense. While we have been working on the concept and the entire business for close to a year now, the brand got launched only a month back. And because there was a lockdown in the country, our sales were not happening, but we started doing a little bit of social media. And every day we're getting like a dozen odd inquiries through our WhatsApp chat, where consumers are asking, what ingredients are you using? Is this a vegan brand? Is this a cruelty-free brand? I have a certain kind of skin problem. Will your product suit me or not? So it's a very, very direct kind of a relationship, one-on-one kind of a relationship, which is happening. I think the entire game for brands and products in this category is changing. And it is changing because of 3 reasons in terms of the brand. One, the brands need to be a lot more transparent now. Earlier, brands had a monologue, so they could decide the narrative which they wanted to put out in front of the consumers. Today, because there is a dialogue for the new age brands, the consumers will decide what is the communication, what is the narrative about, and the brands can only do so much. The brands can only share their part of the information, but the questions are decided by the consumers. Because of this nature of relationship, the engagement is very personalized. It is very one-on-one, and it is very high. It is not like in the old days that you went to the shop, you saw an ad, you went to the shop, you bought the product, and the relationship either continues by you buying the product again or it ends there. It's a very different relationship, because after the product has been purchased, the consumer is going to again write back to you, either through reviews or through responding to your surveys. There is a lot more engagement which is going to be there post purchase also. And the third is this entire agenda of sustainability. Earlier, consumers were not as sensitive towards what is the environmental impact, what is the carbon footprint, whether you're using certain kind of ingredients in the packaging within the product. I think that narrative is completely changed. While we have put out all the information on the consumer packs, when we launched the website, not all the information was there. And then the consumers started asking this on WhatsApp. And now the new update, which we are doing in another couple of weeks, we are disclosing all of this information, which we thought would clutter the website. But the consumers are asking, where is this information? We want to see this information. So I think it's a very different environment we are in today. And there is a great opportunity for relevant brands to be built today.
Wonderful. I think it's really good to know. And in terms of, I think you take me to my second question, where you talk about the consumers who are much more evolved as compared to what you see a couple of decades ago, where they are talking about sustainability, where they're talking about what are the ingredients of the product that they're using. So how are you planning to build that trust? Because I think trust is going to play a very big role, because you guys are not the doctors, you guys are not coming up with your dermatology degrees. I think you're entrepreneurs. So how are you going to ensure that we are reliable, my products are safe for your skin, and you can eventually become the ambassador of our products in the coming months or years?
Yeah. So one is, Sushant, that we follow something called a Pilgrim Code. Yeah. That code is like the ethos or the values of what the brand stands for. This is something which is communicated to consumers on a consistent basis, whether on the pack, whether on the website, whether in discussions on social media at all points of time. There are certain elements of the Pilgrim Code which have been designed in conjunction with what the consumers want. So even before the brand was launched, the products were launched, we had done a lot of one-on-ones, a lot of focus group discussions to understand what the consumers want. This we have combined with our understanding of the domain. While we are not, dermats by qualification, given that I've spent close to 15 years in the industry, I've had a chance to work on the launch of close to 150 odd products over the last 15 years. Many of them were B2B. So whether, I was involved with the chain of trichology clinics. So I've personally trained on trichology. So I'm a trained trichologist. While I'm not a medical trichologist, I can't write a prescription, but I understand trichology. Trichology is the science of hair and scalp. So I am a trained trichologist myself. I have worked extensively on skin formulations with formulation scientists and with marketeers. So there are two ways to look at a formulation. One is to see what the market wants, and the second is to see what research can deliver and marry the two. I've had the opportunity to work on both ends, to work very closely with formulators to say, this is what the market is demanding. Can you come up with something? And sometimes the other way around, where the research has a lot of interesting formulations which we take to the consumers to say, is this of interest? I've had a chance to engage with both ends and work extensively on formulations. So there is a lot of experience which we have in the domain, and then we are working with some consultants, researchers, scientists who are helping us develop products which are of the right quality. All of this combined with the Pilgrim Code, combined with the values and ethos of the brand, which we are making an effort to communicate to our consumers actively, is what we think will make a difference. We also believe that brand building or establishing trust is not a couple of months or a couple of years exercise. It's an extremely long drawn, effort intensive exercise. Normally for a brand to be established, my belief is it takes 8 to 10 years, but it is nothing less than 5 years before you can even say that, I've done something in my life as a brand. So till the time the consumer has not really used multiple products or the same product multiple times, the trust is very fickle. It's like he or she is dating the brand right now. But the marriage will take a really long time, and we are happy to wait. We are not in a hurry to say, look, here is a brand you should fall in love with, and this. While we would do our best to service the consumers, we are happy to wait and see that trust develop, evolve, engage with the customers, engage with the users, answer their queries, and there are a lot of queries I have also been covering. Yeah. The other thing we intend to do, and small efforts have started, is do a lot of consumer education. So we think a big way of developing trust is to talk about the category, not just about what we are doing. So we will talk to customers, talk to our users to educate them on how to take care of their skin, irrespective of what products they are using. So we need to be telling them, what is the difference between a sulfate-free shampoo and a regular shampoo? What is the difference between a body butter and a body lotion? What is the difference between an oil-based serum and a water-based serum? Vitamin C serums are becoming very popular. Do you need a 5% serum or do you need a 20% serum? So these are the kind of customer education initiatives we want to be taking, and with that we will build our trust, our expertise, and over a period of time this relationship will evolve.
Wonderful. And I think one thing I learned, Anurag, while working with some of the dermatologists in US also, I think they spent a lot of time in the initial years writing a lot of blogs. And I think I remember earlier in 2000 when the Facebook was not that popular. So all these doctors were very active on some of these niche vertical forums, writing some really impressive storytelling based blogs, talking about that. And I think it's more about empathy. I think how you connect with the emotions of those consumers rather than selling your product, making them believe that, yes, I'm here to take care of you. I'm here to take care of your skin. I want you to flourish. I want you to look younger. And I think it all starts from there. And I'm glad that the kind of ethos that you're talking about in your brand, I think that resonates with that. That's really nice to hear that. And one last question before I transfer the control to Sundar, that I know you have been a part of this category for over 10 years now, and you have done multiple startups. So is there any interesting aspects of this particular Indian culture about the women's hair or the men's category who are using the spas and the salons and the skincare treatments? How is it vary from the other cultures? I know Pilgrim has an office, you guys open an office in New York and have some presence in London too. So I'm very curious to know that what are the personas of the individuals here in India which makes them distinct?
So if you look at the category, Sushant, normally it has two parts. One is what is called the natural segment, and the second is what is called the derma segment. So the brands you were mentioning, whether it's Dr. Murad or Dr. Perricone, or there are now newer brands also which are there in the derma segment. So in the West, if you see both these, or even in some of the developed markets like the Korean market or the Japanese market, or if you go to Europe or US, both these segments coexist. There is a large natural segment market and there is a large derma market. Both these segments are doing well, all of that. In other countries, in India, when you see, the derma segment is very, very small compared to the natural segment. If you look at the natural segment compared to the overall market, the natural segment is growing at a double the speed at a much higher base. And the derma market is very small right now, largely dominated by international brands at the top end of the market. Because these are international brands, many of them also tend to be luxury brands. The pricing tends to be fairly high. So we are yet to see the emergence or the market evolution of derma brands in India. But a lot more acceptance of naturals as a segment. Obviously, the Ayurveda wave, which Baba Ramdev started around 10-12 years back, that has also helped push the natural segment overall. While Ayurveda has taken off, the natural segment overall have also taken off in a very big way. And it need not be only Indian naturals. It could be, like our first range is called Secrets of Jeju, which is a volcanic island based out of Korea. So we are talking about natural ingredients from Jeju Islands in Korea. even there, while it is very early days, we believe that even those kind of ingredients will also see a very good acceptance in India. So naturals as a segment, we think is much, much bigger in India than it is globally when compared to the derma segment.
Interesting. So Anurag, I think the question that I have for you is that, see, you obviously in setting up this startup, there is a fair bit of effort that has gone. It is a lot of effort that has gone. Let's be honest. If if you look back at your journey, at where did you expend your effort? Was it marketing? Was it consumer research? Was it supply chain? You know, where did you start off, or where do you believe is the right place to start in expending your time, energy, effort, which is all going to be limited when you start? Which do you set up first, and then how do you progress through that journey?
So I'll tell you, Sundar, how we went about doing this. So we spent a fair bit of time, just talking to consumers and understanding the consumers.
Okay.
Now, the challenge on the opportunity for us specifically was because we have been around in the domain for a long time. There are certain biases and prejudice which we may have developed, and it's difficult to sometimes, differentiate what is our personal bias versus what is the consumer saying. Because often when you're doing consumer research, also you go looking for a certain insight. And at the scale we are in, we didn't have a lot of internal data, or we didn't have the capability to do quantitative market research. My own personal bias is a little also towards, when identifying consumer insights, towards qualitative market research than quantitative. Then once you have large amounts of data, you take the help of experts like you and Sushant to kind of dig deeper into it. But when really understanding consumers, I think qualitative is a much better way. So we spend a lot of time trying to understand what does the consumer really want, and where are the gaps in the market. Because like we were discussing, there are these very large brands, and then there is this plethora of new age brands, all of them offering something interesting, something nice, being able to engage with consumers because of the DNA of the brands and the founders. So how do we differentiate ourselves from what is there? So we spent a fair bit of time just understanding consumers, figuring out what our brand would offer, what our brand would not offer. Once this was done, figuring out the brand name, the positioning, the logo, this I think took the longest amount of time. Once this was done, there was some amount of time spent in the formulations, but formulations for us was not as big a challenge, because we could iterate quickly to come to, our target was to launch 11 products. Eventually we could launch 9. The other 2 are kind of stuck, somewhere in terms of what we want the products to deliver. But because we were able to, arrive at 9 products, which we were happy with, I think that part was not the biggest challenge. Then establishing the entire ecosystem of delivering a product to the market, which would mean, developing the packaging, working with the designers, identifying the right printer, identifying the right packaging vendors, and putting them all together so that the final product gets launched. I think all of this also took some time. But the longest bit of time which we spent was on identifying what the consumers want, and then being able to come up with a brand name positioning which was relevant to them.
And in your qualitative research, was social media research a large component, especially given the brand and the category that you play in? Was that a big influence?
So actually we use social media for a little bit of hypothesis validation.
Oh.
But we spoke to close to 50 odd consumers one-on-one to understand what they were saying. Once we had insights from those, we wanted to scale that a little more, especially when we were deciding on which range to launch first. Just to give you a background, Pilgrim as a brand stands for natural beauty secrets from around the world. So our intent is that with every range, we will bring one different tradition from some part of the world to the consumers. So the way there is Ayurveda in India, there are other beauty traditions in different parts of the world, which are natural ingredient based. So the first range is the Korean tradition, which is Secrets of Jeju. The second range will be from some other part of the world. So this is where we took a little bit of social media help to identify which should be the first range to launch.
That's very interesting. I think the second part, second question that I'm going to come to is that typically when you think beauty and wellness, uh, it's probably just a gender bias thing that there is an association with females associated with it. But the more you walk into these centers nowadays, you'll see that there is some sort of a gender parity over there. So, in doing your research, are you seeing that that is a trend change, that more and more men are more actively involved, more participating? And the second part of the question being, when designing any of these experiences at any of these places, how much of taking care of both the genders and making sure their experiences are fulfilled is goes into that design?
So I think, Sundar, like you said, it's been a perception, but if you look at the reality, for a very long time, there has been a lot of gender parity.
Right.
Dermats have been, we have seen a lot of male dermats. When you go to a salon, a lot of barbers have, even in the, women, unisex salons, you have seen that a lot of men serving women customers. So I think this is not a new thing. It's been around for some time. It also, has something to do with what the brand wants to stand for. So there are parts of the society which may not feel, in the Indian context specifically, which may not feel very comfortable if the environment is looks and feels in a certain way. So if you are a women's only brand, then probably the cues of the brand which you will have as a part of the brand experience could be slightly different. If you are a men's only brand, and that's a big tradition, big trend change which we are seeing, there are a lot of men's grooming brands. You are sporting a beard yourself.
You do.
So, there have been multiple beard brands which have come up, multiple men's grooming brands which have come up, all doing quite well, all coming up with very interesting communication, very interesting products, which was not the case. But if you're a unisex brand, then you need to balance the sensitivities of what you are offering. In our case, our communication tends to be a little more focused on women because what we realize is that, still in the Indian context, finally, if you tell a man, how many skin products you're using, he'll say shampoo, face wash, that's the best case. Or a body wash or a shower gel. That's like an alpha male for us, right? For a guy without beard. With a beard, there could be a couple of other products. But if I tell him that, look, you have to use a face scrub and a face mask and a body scrub and a body butter and a hair mask and a night serum, probably most consumers are going to give me some weird stares. Women are naturally a little more open to these, while the penetration continues to be very low. We were discussing that an average woman uses less than 2 products in the Indian urban market. But there is a lot more acceptance for some of these concepts, and there is a lot more willingness to try out the products. And hence, because of the product penetration of many of these products, we are a little more women focused when it comes to our communication. For men, we intend to come up with specific products in the future, whether it is a men's grooming range or a men's skincare, hair care range, which will cue a lot more masculine, colors, experiences. But till then, we will personally be a little more on the feminine side. And we have seen that if the product is right, I think men also tend to kind of accept it.
Yeah. Given a lot of our listeners and subscribers are data enthusiasts or data analysts, if you will, what is the role of data and analytics that you are seeing being played is in this category or in this space?
So right now, Sundar, for us personally, because there is very little data, we are not able to do a lot of analysis. But we are building, our entire experience in terms of being able to map the consumer journey and capture every single data point. And how do you then action on the data which you are gathering? So if we reached out to, X number of consumers, how many of them engaged with us? The ones who engage, how many of them actually engaged in a reasonable manner, not just floated and went away? The ones who engaged in a reasonable manner, are they buying from us? if they're buying from us, what is the ticket size? Where are they dropping off? What is the experience like on the website? If they have bought from us, are they coming back to purchase from us? If they're coming back to purchase from us, what is the repeat frequency? So we are able to, we are attempting to build this, entire user journey and around data, around how we think, which is actionable data.
Right.
And how do we kind of use that data at every point to improve different sales and marketing KPIs, including the experience which we are delivering. So we monitor the whatever reviews are coming on different marketplaces very closely, and there are internal benchmarks which we try and meet. So it's from all perspectives, whether it is from a sales and marketing funnel perspective, whether it is in terms of the product experience. And we have our internal benchmarks where we say that if a certain product is not meeting a minimum threshold of the review, ratings which we expect, we'll either tweak the formulation, and if we're still not able to meet the benchmark, we'll discontinue the product.
Interesting. Sushant, back to you.
Yeah, sure. And see, in terms of the data analytics that you're talking about, I know in your category, the bigger expense is going to be marketing going forward, because that's always the biggest challenge, that how to create more and more awareness. And especially the cost per acquisition is going to be very, very high in the initial few months, till the time you have a decent return customer base. So considering the current market, the current landscape that you have, and the upcoming big marketing spend, are you going to be focusing on the bootstrap model that you currently have, or there are plans to raise capital in the near future?
So we have done a small seed round, Sushant, a couple of months back. The earlier intent was to kind of deploy this and spend a fair bit of money on branding also. Now we have taken a relook at the business plan given the new scenario. And the intent now is that in 12 months time, we want to break even without sacrificing growth, which means that some of the branding expenses will probably take a little bit of backseat, and the focus will be a little more on performance marketing. And with scale, we will try and create some budgets as a percentage of top line to focus on branding initiatives. So that's how we are looking at the business right now. If we are able to hit a reasonable, cost of acquisition, we know that the gross margins are fairly healthy in this business.
Yeah.
So if we are able to break even on a per sale, per transaction basis, I think then we are set, because then the consumer is kind of funneling for the growth. So that is the aspiration. Whether it takes 3 months, 6 months, 12 months is something we have to figure out. Especially when we are trying to do it from our own brand store. Marketplaces, the consumer doesn't really belong to you. There, the break even is much faster, the ROI is much faster, but you have zero control on the data, and the consumer belongs to the marketplace. They can decide to divert the consumer to some other brand, some other product which they like at that point of time. Which is why the eventual attempt is that at least a 50% sales should be happening through the brand website, through the brand store. And there, if we are able to break even on a per transaction basis, then I think we are quite safe. And that's the first milestone we are aiming for.
No, I think that's absolutely right, because during my entrepreneurial journey, I think when I was running my own handicraft store on eBay as well as on Amazon Marketplace, I think the fundamental challenge was that you don't have a control on the consumer, and you can't build that loyalty. It's very transactional. And especially in that category, when you are competing with the manufacturers and the wholesalers who are selling the same tapestries and the same vases at 60-70% the lower price than at which you are selling, you just cannot sustain in that. And especially when you have to ship internationally, pay the octroi, the custom duty, and if the things get stuck in the customs, you are gone. Yeah. So I think it's going to be very important that eventually how soon you come up with your own branded website and take these consumers away. But again, I think Amazon and eBay, they both gives you that initial jump. I think to start with, we all need a good customer base to validate a hypothesis and validate our segment, maybe our formulation, and see how they get received in the market. I remember a very interesting startup I was working with during my entrepreneurial days. The name of the startup was Soltron. Okay, And they used to sell designer boots to African Americans in US. It's a very US focused brand. So they started with the blog first. Okay, instead of opening a store, they started a blog first, and they got some like 250,000 subscribers to that blog. Okay, over a period of 2 to 3 years, amazing videos, focus on music, because that particular segment of the population is too much in hip hop and music and jazzy clothes, the accessories, the shoes and everything. And once they build that community, and that's when they decided, you know what, now we need to launch a brand. And they came up with some really crazy boots, which are like $250, $300 boots. And it was mind blowing, and they did pretty well for the initial few years. So my last question to you is, Anurag, what are some of the interesting lessons that you have learned and some of the mistakes you might have done in your initial entrepreneurial journey that you want to share with our listeners?
So I want to share, one or two interesting learnings which I've had about the Indian consumers. And this goes back to when I was a kid. So I was in school, and, one of my aunts, she bought a really expensive washing machine. So this was some 15 or 20,000 rupees washing machine, some 25 years back. So it was like a top-end washing machine. And then I realized that the washing powder she was using to wash the clothes was the cheapest available in the market. And she was somebody who could afford. So I was not able to understand this dichotomy, that here is a person who's buying like a really expensive washing machine and using the cheapest possible washing powder in that. Then when I grew up, I noticed that there were these really rich people who were buying a Mercedes, or a BMW. But often the conversation was still, yaar, mileage 6 ka hi hai. So for people who don't understand,
that's so true.
Mileage was not good in their Mercedes. And there was a very popular ad campaign which Maruti had then done on this, yaar, kitna deti hai. So, so as Indians, we probably are open to spending a lot of money upfront. So, the upfront cost could be anything. We are probably able to reconcile to that at some point of time. But the running cost or the recurring cost has to be small. So if we have able to devise a business model which takes a lot of money upfront, but there is no recurring expense, I think it works well for a lot of Indian consumers. The second interesting thing which I noticed was that, I don't know if it's true globally, but definitely in India, that we have split personalities. What I mean by this is, and I'll give my own personal example. So when I'm traveling for my business, and this is not just now, for the last 15 years, I look for the cheapest possible hotel, which has just like basic cleanliness, hygiene, and a working air conditioner. So I want a hotel in 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 rupees. But when I'm taking a vacation with my family, I rule out hotels which are cheap or even moderately priced. I look for the most expensive hotels, because there I'm using price as an indicator for luxury. So it's the same customer, and this I found true to be in several cases when I started observing that this is not just true for me. Many other business people, where the company is not different from the entrepreneur, they're looking for like really cutting their. They want to take like an auto when they're getting down. They want to take a bus to go for the meeting. So the business expenses, they're super frugal. But when they're with their family, or when they're there doing something for their personal pleasure, then price is not a barrier at all. So the same consumers looking for extreme value and looking for luxury at two different points of time. So, whether you call this a value-seeking customer or a discount customer, or whether you call this as a luxury customer, I don't know. And there are many of these. There are several million, SME owners, businessmen, entrepreneurs who tend to exhibit this kind of a behavior in the Indian circumstance. So these were just two interesting observations I had, about what I was able to see. In terms of, what I have seen in the market in terms of entrepreneurs, how they build businesses, I think the one tendency which I have seen in a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs is that they tend to operate at a breakneck speed. Now, this has two repercussions. One is often the businesses are not able to sustain that. Some businesses are, but the survival rate in many of those businesses are very, very low. Building a business is like running a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a 100-meter race which you have to cover in the fastest time. You really need to conserve your energy as a business and as a person to be able to complete the marathon. Then you are there for building a sustainable business, a profitable business for all the stakeholders. And this also has repercussions on the entrepreneur or the founding team. That are you able to take off time for yourself, or are you completely engrossed in the business? Being completely engrossed is possible in some cases at some points of time, but as a sustainable business model, I don't know if that's the best way to look at your personal life also. The last thing I want to add here is that when you're in the early days, when you're building the team, even one person in the team who's not fit for the team really breaks the entire team dynamics. Because when you're a 4-member team, 5-member team, 6-member team, one person is like 15-20% of the organization. And that one person can not fitting in well can really impact the performance of the entire organization in those early days. While it's not desirable even when the organization grows larger, I think in the early days, it becomes even more important that every person just fits in completely with the ethos of the company and with what the expected deliverables are.
You reminded me of a very interesting conference I went to in maybe around 2005, 2006 in US in California. There we had some amazing guests. Warren Buffett was there, and I met Bill Gates there. So they were, one of the VC came on the stage and he said, if you're starting your own venture, make sure you are 2 people, okay? Because with 1 person startup, you will get completely insane. With 2 people, you maintain sanity, but don't go for 3 and above because it will be complete chaos. And I don't know to what extent it's true, and but I've seen, I think you need a buddy. You need a buddy to validate your hypothesis, sometimes validate your own biases and prejudices. And I think it's always good to have a partner, definitely. I personally believe.
Sushant, you say that, I am in 100% agreement with the theory. And I have an add-on to that. Not only should you be 2 people, both of them should not be equal. There has to be a substantial difference between the 2, and the second person has to be willing to look up to the first person.
Yeah.
There has to be a very, very clear +1. It is not, you know what in Hindi we call a 19-20 ka difference, but a 15-20 ka difference. And the difference could be for a variety of reasons. What works well in the Indian context is gray hair. So, you know, either one person needs to have more gray hair or no hair.
Or no hair.
Compared to the other person.
So at this note, Anurag, I think I want to thank you for taking our time over the weekend and talking to us. It was really, really beneficial for us. And to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed this conversation and learned from the words of wisdom from Anurag Kedia. If you have any questions, any comments, please post it below this video. We'll be more than happy to entertain it. If there are any suggestions around new topics, please also mention in the comment section. And until then, stay safe, stay connected, and keep flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sushant. Thank you, Sundar, for having me.
Thank you.